to Beating a Dead Horse. As always, I am your host, not watching the election, Sean McKinda.
And I'm your host, also not watching the election, Jackson Keller. Thank fucking God we have to record a podcast tonight. You in the future, you're already like scrounging for beans while you're listening to this because everything's gone to hell.
First of all, thank you for listening to the podcast, even in the post-apocalypse.
I mean, a true fan, a true gamer. What can I say? But we got at least a day or two before we're at that point. So we're gonna revel in the fact that it's Schrodinger's Prez right now. So
yeah, as long as we don't look, we won't know. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. Honestly, I've been off social media all day, and it's felt like any other day, especially because I voted months ago or weeks ago at this point with mail-in voting. It was great. Wonderful.
Same. I went early voting to my board of elections because I don't trust the post office anymore, but I also already voted, so I didn't have to do anything today.
It was great. It was wonderful. We're all done. We sat at home and we can pretend that nothing is going on, and instead we can just talk about Kubo and the Two Strings, another Laika film following up on our Paranorman discussion back in October. Laika is, for those of you who are unaware, are a studio that operates pretty much entirely in stop-motion puppetry. There is some CG work that's done on the back end, but even the CG work is mostly to touch up actual live stop-motion, live non-action, live stop-action puppetry. It's there to cover up puppetry elements. But it is a wonderfully, wonderfully done film about a young boy going out on a grand quest to tell his story and hang out with a giant beetle, Matthew McConaughey, and a monkey, Charlize Theron. It's a wonderful movie to watch. It's a wonderful movie to experience. But is it a wonderful movie to talk about? Let's find out. This sounds like I'm about to let's cut to a reporter Jackson in the field.
Thanks, Sean. So as you can see here, we have Kubo and the Two Strings sitting right in front of us. And if you're kind enough to be watching this broadcast from the comfort of your bean hovel, then you're hoping for some hot and spicy Laika Discourse, which I'm here to give you, baby. Paranorman Part 2, Electric Boogaloo, let's go. So my feelings on Kubo and the Two Strings, nearly identical in terms of the broad strokes to how I felt about Paranorman. Although I think that like the stuff I enjoyed about it, I enjoyed slightly less, and the stuff that bothered me about it bothered me slightly more. But otherwise, broad strokes, it's very much the same song and dance, which if you recall, if you were around for a Paranorman episode, it is a very, very well done, beautifully animated, intelligent, smart movie with fun characters and emotional dynamics and all that. But there's a big stinky butt. Two cheeks on this butt, in fact. which
I'm sorry, is there... Do you generally, when you say butt, only refer to a single-cheeked butt? Because generally there are two cheeks on a butt.
I mean...
I'm sorry, I do need to pick apart this metaphor for a second here. You can't sneak this one by me.
So Paranorman was a cigarette butt, where there was only one butt. But here, it's a human butt, so there are indeed two cheeks.
But cigarette butts don't have cheeks.
Ooh, I feel like this is the Danganronpa rebuttal showdown. You're slashing away at all my arguments here, Sean.
Does this mean I win already? Wait, is the episode already over? I win. Kubo's a great movie. Let's go home.
I mean, Kubo is a very, very good movie. It's a very good movie. I enjoyed watching it quite thoroughly for the most part. To say what bothered me definitely requires hard spoilers. But even though, much like Paranorman, I'm going to spend a lot of time in this episode in critic mode. Specifically not like critic as in I'm evaluating the movie, specifically being a critical asshole. Know that this does not lessen my recommendation for Kubo and the Two Strings, which is a movie that you should watch if you enjoy animated films, if you've got, particularly if you've got any interest in like animation as an art form.
Hang on, listen, let me just feel your chest. Do you have a heartbeat? Yes. Watch the fucking movie, y'all.
Yes, it is very, very good. Most of like, in fact, all of my problems basically with it can be chalked up to like the last 10 minutes. And even then it's not enough to like ruin the movie. It's still a delightful adventure full of heart, full of, memorable characters, full of great designs, full of great action scenes, full of great music, good character dynamics. It's got everything you would want from a fantasy adventure film. And then Jackson rages about the themes again because, why wouldn't he?
So as a point of comparison, this is my second or third time watching Kubo. I'm a big Laika fan in general. So I, right off the bat, have to say that I do still really like this movie. I agree with Jackson in that I think Paranorman is a better movie in general. I think that might just go down to the fact that I have a more of a fondness for the horror genre. And so like that kind of tickles some little extra neurons in my brain as opposed to this, which is a solid, fun adventure romp, and I enjoy it quite a bit, but doesn't hit the same notes that I am looking for. I will say as well that I think that Jackson and I will have some similar issues with the ending, specifically one spot.
Sean will be joining me on one of these butt cheeks.
Yeah, I will definitely stand on the left mound with Jackson over here. But I do think that it's worth mentioning that if you are not going to stick around with us into the spoiler discussion of this movie, a lot of, I would argue, Jackson's issues with the film are more from an ideological standpoint than from the movie falls flat on its face thematically standpoint.
Yeah, I would also agree with that. I was thinking about this movie a lot, and I was comparing it to other family animated movies that tackle similar subject matter and sort of why I responded more positively to those themes than I did with Kubo's. But in general, I don't think that the movie is in any way like poorly made or narratively unsound.
Minus that one part that we want to talk about. Minus the one cheek.
Right. Yeah, the other cheek, but like as far as like the one that bothered me more, it is very much like I see basically like the argument being made, and I just kind of fundamentally disagree. But that's not to say that the movie, like Sean said, like falls on its face or shits the bed or like, does anything egregious. I think, in fact, if it weren't for, longtime listeners, probably have an idea of what's coming when I say this. I'm tipping my hand a little bit. If I had seen this movie when it first came out in theaters in 2016, I probably would not have thought about the things that I thought about after seeing this movie in 2020, when my life has changed a lot in those 4 years.
There's some themes in this movie.
We got some themes, and basically, I guess like if I had to say like sort of because it's officially a trend, right? Like between this and Paranorman, there is now Jackson Keller Laika Discourse, which I feel like I need to pithily sum up, and it's basically this: because Laika, from the two movies that we've talked about here, the stories are very, very smart. Like not just smart for a kid's movie in terms of like the setups and the mechanics. Like they're just really well thought out in general, but it's almost like the setups and like the worlds and like, the ideas that we're grappling with are like enough to sit at the table with a like, drama for like, an adult or like a PG-13 movie or something. But the core themes, the core message is still very much like a kid's movie. And that's not a problem necessarily. I think it's great that Laika is doing this, that it doesn't, treat kids like idiots, that like, you can watch Paranorman or you can watch Kubo as a kid, and like it's the kind of movie that, maybe you really like it just for like, the silly monkey and, the spooky ghost and Paranorman, then you keep coming back to it and you realize that like the movie's touching on some real shit, and that's great. I don't want to dismiss that at all. But maybe like this is sort of the dynamic that makes me, it's like, oh, like you're almost there. I'm almost with you there, like a film. You're really smart. But like whether it's because like I'm too cynical and like, you know, the movie still needs to be a kid's movie, whether it's just because like I just have a more like I wouldn't even say more pessimistic in this case, just like a fundamental disagreement, a different point of view with like the writer on this one. Like what it is, I don't know, but like they're very, very intelligent, well-made movies that nonetheless there's like one barrier that's been keeping me from like fully letting myself really love the movies the way I kind of want to, because like everything else about them is great. Like, you know, the writing, the voice acting, the animation. So yeah, that's the Jackson Heller Laika Discourse. So I feel like we have to do another one at some point and see if we're 3 for 3.
Yeah, I think come December we should talk about Coraline, which is the big Laika one, and the one that neither of us have seen. So I think it'd be interesting to go into one of these completely blind, as opposed to, as we have in the past, two where one of us, specifically me, has watched these movies at least once before, and has thoughts and feelings already articulated, and Jackson comes in and goes, no, it wasn't adult enough for me. Yeah.
It wasn't edgy enough for my gamer sensibilities. I like things a little more adult, Sean, than this baby Nintendo crap.
Where was Rick and Morty in it? Excuse me.
If it's animated and it doesn't feature either Rick and Morty or the Joker, no sell.
To be clear, I am yanking Jackson's chain. I do think that there is some merit to what he is saying, as I said, mostly because I do feel that the disconnect comes from an ideological standpoint, which is not something that necessarily can be reconciled with in either of these movies. I think that just, you know, your own personal taste on the movie, and to still enjoy them despite that ideological difference is commendable. You know, he's not coming in here being like, fuck these movies, they're really, really good, but you know what? Those last 2 minutes said something that I don't totally agree with, so they can kiss my butt.
Yeah, it's especially because, like, you know, the difference is, like, they're not, it's not something like I disagree with the movie and find like reprehensible about it. You know, like it's not like the movie is secretly saying like fascism good.
Oh yeah, no, like, not even a little bit. It's much more just like, this is our interpretation of life and death, and this is Jackson's, and they're like almost there, but just enough to irritate, you know?
It's like if we had to take like a Evangelion like Pacific Rim compatibility test, it'd be like 80%, and you know the guys in charge would think that's good enough to throw us in the robot, but like at some point like that extra 20% would rear its ugly head and things go horribly wrong and set up the third act conflict.
That's a description for you. I mean, I got what he was going for. I don't know what else to add to it. Kaiju.
I like anime.
You don't say.
The creators of Kubo clearly do too.
Yes, that's actually a good thing to kind of jump off of really quick here while we're still in the pre-discussion, and is just kind of worth noting how very, 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 very white Kubo and the Two Strings is, despite being a ostensibly very Japanese movie in a lot of ways, very Japanese inspired. But the entire main cast is like Matthew McConaughey, the kid from fucking Game of Thrones. There's Charlize Theron in it. I will say there are two Asian men who I think say a total of 4, maybe 5 lines between the two of them. Yikes. But I also bring this up not just to recognize the inherent flaws within the Hollywood system, which is important to recognize, especially if you go to watch a movie like this, but also to kind of set the stage for some of the discussions we're going to be having. Because as we were watching Kubo, both of us, on our own volition, kind of came to the realization that Coco is a fairly decent companion film to Kubo that both highlights what Kubo does well, which is to say pretty much everything that Coco does well, because Coco is a nearly perfect movie, but also does a lot to underscore where Kubo falls short, which is in a lot of ways where Coco doesn't fall short, thanks to a history of tradition and also not having a bunch of white people make it up on the spot.
Yeah, there's something like because I didn't do the research on the production so much. So I'm glad that Sean's here to back up what was my gut feeling, which was like, I mean, because we're going to be talking about Shinto again, despite me knowing like not as much about Shinto as I should for a guy that's going to be moving to Japan.
I can't believe that we've stumbled into this twice within 2 weeks.
Well, I mean, that's what happens when one of the co-hosts is a disgusting fucking weeaboo, I guess.
I mean, that's fair, but I mean, I think we would have stumbled into it even if we weren't. Just to be clear, because last week Akira, we got way into gods and religion, and here I think it's an important facet of it, no matter how you look at it.
It's pretty clear from the beginning, and like to say something that's still broad, like non-spoilers, that like I think that Kubo, like one of the things about it and Coco as a point of comparison is that broadly speaking, they are both, family adventure movies about death, and they are both about it in different ways. It's not like an immediately obvious comparison, although even in Kubo, which is less like outwardly, about death, right? Because Coco has like the Dia de los Muertos aesthetic like built into everything. Whereas Kubo, it's more obvious from the beginning that like the plots about death, like death figures into the backstories of the characters and like, their relationship with it and like the family and stuff. Like it's not as explicit, but even pretty early on, it's apparent that Kubo is going to be very concerned with like issues of death and memory and all that good stuff that Coco is also very much concerned with. So I'm going to be making some comparisons to Coco later on, because I do agree with Sean that the cultural aspect has a lot to do with what makes Coco resonate more, right? That like there is and I don't know the full background behind like who like how many people of Latin American background were consulted on Coco, or who the writers were, but like there is, if nothing else, it feels like even if there is some like white guys in Hollywood flying in the dark on that one, it does feel like either just because there was more like research put into it, or like the actors or what have you, but there's something about Coco that feels maybe more like fleshed out when it comes to referencing that cultural history. And I know, like, from the few things I do know about Shinto, it's not like Kubo gets it totally wrong or anything like that, but it's definitely a lot less of a thing on the mind of the creators. Like the real concern is more about storytelling, because the main character is a storyteller. And so like some of the the Shinto stuff is not necessarily as integrated, and it's definitely like you watch the movie and you don't think that like the writer like really this is how like he views death. This isn't how like he views the world, just kind of using it to jump off for like the fantasy adventure story, which I mean, and again, like that wasn't something that like I looked up in advance. That was just kind of the gut feeling that I had, so I'm glad to see it was validated.
For what it's worth, Kubo is a completely whole cloth story. It is not based on anything, which a certain scene sparked my curiosity about that. It doesn't really matter what scene. It's not relevant to the discussion in any way, shape, or form. But it did encourage me to go look that up, which did, show me that there is not the same history that Coco has for it. We should talk about spoilers here. I feel like we're dangerously brushing up against them, and it's getting harder. We're just getting vaguer and vaguer, and the conversation is getting less and less interesting to follow. So
gotta circle the drain. So let's go ahead and dive down that hole.
flushed away. That was a movie about a rat in a toilet, if I remember correctly.
It sure was. Let's go plunge between these two supple cheeks that are, I almost said Coco, that are Kubo's flaws.
Jackson, I do really hate this metaphor that you have chosen for this episode. In no small part because it does kind of imply that the good part of Kubo is in fact like between those two cheeks, and that's a butthole. If you're enjoying the podcast, and I don't know why you would be at this point, support us on Patreon, patreon.com/BADHcast. Follow us on Twitter, twitter.com/BADH_cast. Next week, we're going to be talking... We're going to be talking about Cowboys and Aliens. Do y'all remember that movie? No? Jackson and I do for some fucking reason. I saw that in theaters, and I just want to watch it and talk about it again because I have not seen it in years, and I remember almost nothing about it, but it compels me. The Cowboys compel me.
We've been watching quite a few Westerns on the show over the course of like our however many year run this has been. So like I feel like we're pretty well equipped to have some spicy takes about, immortal film Cowboys and Aliens. Which I also have a weird fixation on despite having never seen it.
I feel like it's just one that like our age group like clicked onto because it was such a bizarre fucking premise for a movie, and then no one went to see it because it's such a bizarre fucking premise for a movie, except for me who saw it in a cheap theater that I was working at the time because why not? Yeah, exactly. That was eerie.
It was a meeting of the minds here on Beating a Dead Horse. But, it's real funny, I guess, like, before we get into Kubo, that, like, I remember that me and my friends, like, we watched, like, the trailer for Cowboys and Aliens on YouTube. Like, my little squad of, like, high school boys were like, oh, man, like, Daniel Craig cowboy, like, fighting aliens, like, sick. Let's make a day of it. Let's all go.
And Harrison Ford.
That's right. I forgot about that. Yeah. So we were all like, yeah, let's go. And then we just didn't. And I've always kind of been sad about that.
To be fair, I feel like we're going to find out that you probably made the correct decision there, but we'll find out.
I'm almost certain the fact that there was supposed to be like a friendship bonding moment around Cowboys and Aliens that didn't happen for me made it far more like memorable in my memory than if we had actually seen it, where I probably would have forgotten forever unless it was like Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter levels of terrible. So
it stuck with me in some capacity, and I did see it. So
that's true.
I liked it is the thing, and I'm very worried about what that's going to say about me next week.
Oh, find out for the payoff on that cliffhanger.
For now, though, we should talk about Kubo. So let's get into spoilers right about now. Jackson, I think that the best place to do this is to just let you talk for a minute here. And then I'm going to come back in and say, basically, yep, that's Jackson's perspective. I disagree. And then we talk about the ending.
Sounds good. That's probably the only way to go about it. So what is my problem with Tubo? Banjo Tubo. What is my problem with Kubo and the two strings?
What do I do with that? For a second, I'm like, oh, I'll just edit out that mistake. And then you laugh into your next take. And now I'm stuck with this weird, like, ha, without the context of what it's staying in at this point. Like, this whole conversation is staying in.
The reason that I said that is because I'm staring at a poster I bought today of like one of the original renders of Banjo-Kazooie. So when I said Tubo, I thought of Banjo-Tooie while I was looking at that, and then laughed and said Tubo again. So that's why that happened. That's some inside baseball.
This is going to be a nightmare episode to edit, huh?
Sure is. So what is my problem with Tubo? The problem with Kubo...
You.
The problem with Kubo, my problem with Kubo is this. There are a few kids movies, a few family adventure films, a few animated family fantasy adventure films about death. One of them is Coco. The other one is The Lion King. I'm going to talk more about Coco because I feel like I have more of a leg to stand on. because obviously my view of The Lion King is severely painted by nostalgia. But I think it's also relevant because I think there is a distinction between how The Lion King presents death and how Kubo presents death, despite them being on the surface very similar. And so the thing about Kubo is that the whole movie builds up this family dynamic between Matthew McConaughey Beetle and Charlize Theron Monkey and Kubo. And of course, it turns out that that's his actual mother and father, and long lost father who we thought was dead, he actually forms a relationship with, gets to be part of a family like he always wanted, and how nice. Which is why, of course, both Monkey and Beetle have to get cut down pretty brutally, pretty quick and effectively. And Kubo is now, he starts the movie thinking he only has one parent, he gets two, and then he loses them both. This is not my problem with the movie and the way it presents death. This is all plot. This is all good stuff. They play it well. The beats work. Where I start to bristle with the movie, and I think bristle really is the just the best word for it, is that the whole theme behind the movie, combining this focus on death and this focus on storytelling, sort of leads to a natural conclusion. This idea that people are immortalized through storytelling. And that's basically it. He lives in you. Obviously that's why I was thinking about Lion King. And although, not quite as directly making that comparison with Coco, it's very much the same thing. There's a young kid who's some sort of artist, both musicians, in fact. But with Coco, there's a lot of dedication to the mechanics of the Dia de los Muertos world and how precisely, having the photos on the ofrenda and leads the dead people to come back and be reunited with their families, and how eventually there is, despite everything, there is a final death in Coco. And that is, of course, when there is nobody around anymore to remember that person, to tell their stories.
It's almost like it's a long-established tradition passed down through generations and
well-established
cultural norms, and there's background and story to it. I don't know why I'm adding that here, but maybe it'll come into play in a minute.
Maybe it will. To be clear, it's not a one-to-one comparison with Kubo, because it's not like Kubo literally resurrects his parents through song. That doesn't happen. They stay dead throughout the movie. So we're sticking
wild twist.
Yeah. I mean, for a kids movie, that is a pretty wild twist. And so it's not a one-to-one comparison, but I guess what I want to say is that because even though there's more fantasy elements or more spiritual elements or more religious elements, whatever you want to call it, going on in Coco, because they are so well established and so well grounded, it's easy to feel the emotions of what that conveys, and use that in the same way that any sort of cultural tradition, regardless of if it's rooted in reason or not, right? It's the idea that we have this tradition to help us grapple with something that as small, weak, simple-minded little humans that we can't grapple with. And there's something about that rings very true in Coco, especially for a family movie. You don't get that sort of memory keeps people alive until it doesn't. And that's something that I was thinking about a lot, and that I knew my grandparents, and I had a relationship with them, and to an extent, he does live in you, and that the values and the lessons and the memories of one generation pass to another, that's all true. I'm not contesting that, but it's that extra little twist that Coco puts on it that Kubo does not, and Kubo just sort of leaves it there and kind of takes it one further. So because if you just sit there and sort of think about it, you might know, depending on your family background, you might know who your grandparents were. You might even know who your great-grandparents were and had a relationship with them. I was lucky enough to have that. But I can't even tell you my great-great-grandparents' names, let alone anything about them, right? And so that's where like that element of Coco and how that also ties into like celebrity with De La Cruz and like all this stuff and like who gets immortalized and remembered and sort of the ethics and all that. Like there's a lot of really richness to that. On the other end of the spectrum, you have something like Lion King, which I think like in terms of mechanics, like Kubo is closer to. And that like in the Lion King, you have Simba, who is, mourning.
For what it's worth, we did not mention that Kubo is a lion. So hence the similarities to Lion King.
What?
I'm making a joke. Never mind. Cut this.
I'm sorry, what?
I like to quip in occasionally to like spice things up and keep you on your toes a little bit, because like I feel like if just one of us talks for too long, it kind of becomes almost a monotonous thing. So like I try and like that's not even to say that like what you're saying is wrong. I'm again agreeing with the thesis that you are putting forward, just disagreeing with the ideology behind it. But I just like to occasionally try and quip in and make a joke. And you're like, Kubo is similar to Lion King in a lot of ways. And I'm like, the joke, it's like, Kingdom Hearts when Sora goes to the Lion King world and the lion. Kubo's a lion. This has gotten away from me. This was meant to be a short little jab to spice things up and wake our viewers up and remind them that this thing is happening, and instead it just turned into a clusterfuck.
See, the problem is that I wasn't sure if you were doing a bit like Kimba the White Lion, like that old anime of I couldn't remember if like I feel gaslit into thinking that Kubo turned into a lion in the movie at some point, and you were referencing some bit that I don't remember. So
Sorry.
Oh, $50, incredible. That's how much you can pay at our Patreon. Anyway, unlike Kubo, who is not a lion, that is another way. The Lion King is not like Kubo. So, in the Lion King, you have Simba, and there's a lot of grand, like, mythical framing in the Lion King, just like Kubo. Like, Mufasa talking to Simba in the stars is probably like one of the most famous scenes in movie history at this point. Like, there's still that, like, not quite mystical element, more like kind of visualization of metaphor. Like, it's got that in common with Kubo too. And that, like, the memories when Kubo does his, like, string spirit bomb against the Moon King at the end, like, all the ghosts show up. But, like, it's not clear whether or not those are, like, actually ghosts. They're probably not. They're probably just, like, magical energy, like, taking the visual metaphor of, like, people's memories. Doesn't really matter. So why then, aside from nostalgia, which I acknowledge, why then do I not bristle with Lion King in the same way that I bristle with Kubo? And the thing about it is that when it comes to, like, the he lives in you narrative and, like, the people who are gone still live on through, like, the loved ones they left behind, that is an important thing. Like, pretty much the only way we could, like, cope with death in this world if we want to stay sane, frankly. But the thing about that journey is that it's very personal, and that, and in The Lion King, I feel like that's how it's mostly played. That, like, what Simba takes from Mufasa, it's not so much that Mufasa is going to be around forever, but Mufasa is going to be around as long as Simba is around, because Simba has internalized those teachings, those memories that love he had for his father. And that is all also true of Kubo. But where I start to bristle with the movie is that it feels like Kubo, in the framing, takes that a little bit further, because it combines it with another trope, another idea that I'm not really a fan of, and I don't have as clear of a reason for why. Like, it's a bit, I'd say it's a bit more personal, but, like, that's not quite true. It's weird. I don't know how to explain it, but this idea that, like, storytelling, like, immortalizes people or things, and I feel like that is a concept that is just not true. And don't get me wrong, I love storytelling. I think it's very valuable. I think it's very important. I wouldn't be writing books. I wouldn't be co-hosting a podcast where I bitch about storytelling for hours and hours every week if I didn't believe that. But I also think it's important not to overstate the power that can have, because think about, that example I gave earlier with, do you even know, let alone remember like what your great-great-grandparents' names were? Like that, but for art. Like it's, and maybe 1,000 times more so. Like a select few authors, stories, archetypes probably will get to live on as long as there are humans around to tell those stories. But that is the vast, vast minority. Like even extremely popular, extremely profitable works of art and stories will often be left behind. A good example that is brought up with this idea, and I think one of the examples that I was first told to me that made me move away from this idea, because I used to be really into this idea, like I'm gonna write books, so like the book will outlive me and I'll be like immortalized through that or whatever. But the thing about that is, even if you are very successful, that is no guarantee that like your ideas will continue to reach generations beyond you when you're gone. Famously, one of Charlie Chaplin's contemporaries of like the silent comedy era, Harold Lloyd, I think.
I couldn't tell you. I have no idea.
I'm pretty sure his name is Harold Lloyd, was like just as popular, maybe more so than Charlie Chaplin, but like basically just through like the cruel calculus of, history. A lot of people know who Charlie Chaplin is. I had trouble remembering Harold Lloyd's name, and I'm bringing him up as an example.
It's just the joke from Portal when you're playing the 2-player Portal 2 thing, and GLaDOS makes a quip about, just like Albert Einstein's brother, something like that, history will only remember one of you.
Yeah, no, exactly. And like that process is often arbitrary. Like it's not because like Harold Lloyd wasn't a talented comedian or like Charlie Chaplin was better or anything like that necessarily. It's just, that's just how it goes. And like that was someone who had success in their day, like let alone the like thousands, millions of like stories and works of art that don't find any success and like are only going to stick with those people that read them or watch them or whatever. And so I guess I bristle with the idea, especially combining it with the element of death, because it makes me a little sad in a way that like it's a nice idea, but I feel like because I don't buy into like the truth value of it necessarily, that there's something kind of lacking, like it doesn't ring true and like bring those emotions out. And so I guess like if we're gonna get super fucking personal, I'll just lay my cards on the table for exactly what my thought process is. So like Simba, I no longer have my father in my life, but I take a lot of value and a lot of, and really am informed as a person by like the memories I have with him and like, the things that he taught me and all that stuff. But like the problem is, imagine now that I have kids, they will have never met their grandfather. And I can tell them as many stories about him as I want. But like that, and even if they take like a real interest in their family history, right? And like they, ask me about all the stories and like, real take an interest, like, well then, next generation, they have kids. How likely is it that like those stories and those memories like live on beyond that? Like not really. Like, and that's a depressing thought. But so I think it's more important for me to focus on that personal element of that narrative, of that, like, he lives in you, like, we play a role in the lives of the people that we love, not because those people are going to live on forever, even as a story. They probably won't. But that doesn't mean that they still weren't valuable to you in your time on this planet, and like that those memories aren't strong things that can keep you going when things are hard. And Kubo is about that too. Don't get me wrong, but like it's that distinction, that like almost like deification of like this immortalizing element of storytelling. I really just don't believe in it, and I really bristle at that, especially when you combine with the really personal sort of like grappling with death thing. I think it has implications that aren't always the best. So yeah, I don't know. That was my main hang up with the movie. And again, it's not to say that I think the movie is like completely full of shit or it doesn't say anything like truthful or valuable, but it's it's an important hair for me to split, I guess.
And this, as I said, it's where I come back in and say, I think that the thesis upon which Jackson has built his argument is sound and valid, and I do agree with a lot of the elements that lead up to it, especially the comparisons of Coco and Kubo, and based on the basis on which they are built, especially Kubo being a little bit of a more weaker theological exploration than Coco is. But I do not have the same ideological dissonance that Jackson brings to the table in the discussion of Kubo, so it doesn't bother me in that way, and I think that there is a not insubstantial swath of people that will feel the same way that I do, but I also think that there is a not insubstantial amount of people that will feel the exact same way Jackson does. And again, it doesn't necessarily take away from the movie either way in a did you enjoy this movie, yes or no perspective, but can have a profound implication on your lingering thoughts of Kubo or whatever you might be watching at the time. And so, yeah, I mean, it really boils down to here I am. I don't disagree with Jackson's basis for his argument. I disagree with his conclusion, but that's only because I have an ideological difference than Jackson. So here we are.
What do you stand for, Kubo? Decide here and now.
Well, Jackson, you told us what you stand for this episode. I told y'all what I stand for theologically in my Akira episode. So, hey, at this point, y'all should get a pretty good idea on what we're going to connect with if you have themes of life and death.
Bam!
It is fair to say that as well, that just because I do not have as strong of a relationship with life and death as Jackson does. Like my whole personal philosophy is far more apathetic. Heyo, if you listen to the Akira episode, that stuff like this just doesn't faze me. For me, it's just another interpretation of life and death, and I'm fairly open to pretty much anything that you can throw at me, and I just take it at face value as this is what this person believes in, and I neither fault them nor disagree with them unless, you're like, I'm a fascist and I think that, minorities go to hell, whereas then, up yours, pal. That's a shitty belief and you shouldn't, enact your beliefs on people in this world. But as an art form to make a statement like that, I will hear you out. And in cases like Kubo versus Coco, I don't know that I have a big bull in this fight. I just kind of let the chips fall where they lie. So,
and I was actually just thinking about this, and that I think that this movie is at exactly, this is because I acknowledge that it is a hair that I am splitting for sure. Some people are going to hear me say that. It's okay, maybe, but why are you so hung up on this? And I think it's precisely because this is about storytelling. And this is about the meaning of life and life and death, about the intersection of those two things, possibly the two things I feel most strongly about. So, yes, to reiterate, I don't anticipate most people to bristle the way that I do, but I gotta draw my line in the sand. What do you stand for, Jackson?
I mean, that's what this podcast is for us to bristle at little minutia. And I mean, if you want a perfect example of me doing that, you can go back and listen to our not No Country for Old Men episode.
Fuck, what was it? True Grit
episode in which I yelled about a hole in the ground for far too long. We should talk about the actual ending though at this point for a minute here. Most specifically, the ending of the Moon King, because I think the actual ending is fine, but the 5 minutes before the actual ending is where things get weird.
Yeah, this is the one thing in the movie that I would say no, this is a flaw.
Yeah.
I would almost call what happens in this moment sinister.
Yeah, no, for sure. So if you are joining us on this episode without having seen Kubo, at the end here, Kubo does defeat the Moon King by turning him from a giant space worm that looks a lot like the Avengers.
I was thinking that too. Yeah.
Into a old man. And this old man has no memory, and so it falls to Kubo and the rest of the villagers to fill it in for him. Which it kind of, makes sense in a tabula rasa, blank slate storytelling type of thing going on here, but is also really insidious and dark, because they are basically imprinting on this man their own identities and beliefs and feelings, which is something I've talked about at great length in terms of like body horror and annihilation and just terrible, we are not who we were before we began a conversation with another person. Yes, but that's all tackled in very dark, gritty media, of which Kubo is not.
Yeah, and like I think that this like compounded the problems I was having with sort of the deification of storytelling, because this is an extremely dark side to the power of storytelling and like changing someone's perception of reality through like complete lies, like whether that's like to what extent are you the same person, with or without certain memories or not. Or just in the, good old fashioned like propaganda sense. Like this is a component of storytelling for sure, but the movie's real glib about it.
Jackson made a reference to Nier Automata in our pre-discussion. I'm not going to dig too deep into the exact scene because it's spoilers in one of the best scenes in Nier Automata. But the game basically asks you to wrestle with the question of, is it better to be dead or to be reset from a blank slate for others to fill you in, which is a horrifying question that is presented to the player, and one that like basically asks you to sit and marinate on it for a long time. And Kubo just is like, oh, it doesn't matter, this bad guy is now our own clay to sculpt as we see fit, and we are going to do with him what we want. And like the idea there is that they make him into this nice old man as opposed to the cranky moon king who stole Kubo's eye that he was. But like still y'all,
I think that you've summarized it well enough that I don't want to go into like I completely agree. Basically, there is like, I don't know if you want to put like a timestamp, because there is one specific example I want to give as like a counter example that's spoilery, and it's about BoJack Horseman, actually late season BoJack Horseman. So I don't know, maybe skip to this point, Sean, whatever that ends up being.
49 minutes 32 seconds.
Because there's sort of a similar thing going on in BoJack Horseman, and I think it's season 5 when he's dealing with his mother's like deteriorating memory and like dementia, and how like she was horribly abusive to him growing up, but also had like was horribly abused herself, like cycle of abuse. And basically what it comes to is that in the last days, she's at her most like vulnerable, like her memory's completely gone. Like, BoJack's had like, 40 some years of resentment and rage and like, a pretty like thoroughly well justified desire to like air the grievances at this point. But he doesn't. And in that way, like, he lies to his mother in a lot of ways, and they're in like their last scene together actually alive, and that like BoJack doesn't do the cruel thing. And the point of this scene isn't, we want to like remake, crotchety old, like, abusive mother into like, the perfect mom that BoJack always wanted. This is like, that it's a very big like personal moment for BoJack, that despite being like arguably very justified in like taking out like his trauma on her, that he doesn't, that like there is some strength to his character. Like it's a good reflection on him, even though functionally the action being taken is very similar. Like he is lying to her, but that's the tone of that scene, that it is played as like BoJack is making a hard choice, that he is like giving up some sort of resolution that he can never get in favor of like showing some kindness and like holding on to his humanity a little bit more. Whereas this feels much more like, don't worry, Mr. Badman, the bad parts you were gone, we could build you better, which is a much different thing.
It's the 6 Moon King dollar man. No, that didn't work, did it?
I mean, you did it though. If it's a bit, you must commit.
I did. I just don't think it was a good bit to commit to is the thing. Well, do we have anything else that we really want to say about Kubo? I mean, again, this is has been a very Jackson-heavy episode, mostly because my consensus of Kubo is that it's still a great movie, and I really enjoyed it. I like Paranorman more, which is why I had more to argue with Jackson about in Paranorman, especially because, to be perfectly honest, I don't want to get into a theological argument with Jackson, mostly because, A, his views don't harm anyone, and B, it just doesn't feel worth it given that, I mean, they're valid views. What do you want from me? So,
I mean, listen, we can one day, maybe one day, Jackson will fully tip that fedora. That day is not today.
Well, in that case, then, I've been Sean McKinda. You can find me on Twitter at Sean_McKinda, where I am not at currently because I am not paying attention to the election.
And I'm Jackson Keller. You know what? I've been thinking about making a reappearance on Twitter soon, so I'll just give it here. Jackson J. Keller on Twitter. Follow me. There's going to be stuff. None of it's going to be politics. I'm going to mute all politics from my feed so I have a stream of dogs, fan art, and waifus, and that's all I'll have.
And I would act quick on this because Jackson's reappearance on Twitter is usually few and far between. So like he pops up for like a month or two every few years. So get excited for that.
You'll get some hot Mario tier list content. I don't want to tip my hand too much. But
That's the political commentary I'm into. Let's get some discourse. If you want to get in contact with the podcast, it's at BADH_cast on Twitter, although mostly that's just a place to find out when new episodes are coming out, as well as like when bonus episodes come out. If you want to get in contact with Jackson and I, the best place to do so is on our Discord. And you can get access to our Discord by signing up at our Patreon, patreon.com/BADHcast. $1 a month gets you access to our Discord. $5 a month gets you access to our backlog of bonus episodes, which are all stone cold bangers. $10 a month gets you access to our Discord, our backlog of bonus episodes, as well as the ability to request bonus episodes, and a little something.
Thank you so much, Julia, Travis, Pat, Mom, Aunt Summer. Hooray!
Yay! Also, thanks to Lords of the High with the use of our theme song. It is Suicide, alternate take off the album High Octane with Low Expectations. They're a wonderful band. You should go check them out however you can. Stream their music, buy their music, whatever you got to do. Artists are struggling right now, so please support artists, theater people, whoever. Just support them. We need it. Also, thanks to 25yearslatersite.com. There's a little button of us in the corner, but you should definitely go check out that website. There's a bunch of really talented people doing a lot of really talented writing that you should absolutely go read. Next week, as I said, we are going to be talking about Cowboys and Aliens. God forgive us our sins.
I mean, you know what? Thank God that, like, it's going to be a real challenge for me to find a way to, muck this one up with some fucking, theological, philosophical wankery. Like, fuck, let's get some Cowboys and Aliens, for God's sake.
Well, actually, if you read the aliens as the deities in the Western Front...
Sean, don't curse us. I'm actually going to say it.
Bye.
Don't you go into the ground. Don't you go